Hi, this is Paul, and we're not able to do a recording of this event in Washington, D.C. The venue won't permit live streaming or a video recording. They have their reasons, and that's fine. So I thought I'd give a little report on the first day of the Washington, D.C. event. This was organized by Mark Connolly from Northern Ireland, who was here from the More Christ channel, and Joe from the Gist from Joe channel. And they organized this, and they invited myself, Michael Martin, and Spencer Clavin. And so we had the first day's events yesterday, and I thought it was fabulous. It was wonderful. The evening before, we were staying in a monastery, and the five of us got a chance to sit around the table and get to know each other better and enjoy each other's company, and that was absolutely terrific. We had the warm-up conversation that you can find on my channel and some of the other channels, where we sort of started getting into things, but you never know when you get three people together how things will go. The itinerary was fairly sequential. Mark and Joe interviewed first Michael, and then Spencer, and then myself, and then Joe gave a presentation about psychology and his experience being a counselor, and so it was really very good. Maybe a little bit of summary. Of course, you can find Michael Martin, also known as the Sophiologist, on Twitter, and one of the things that really struck me about his presentation was this the current need of our sensitivity to see the glory of God through his creation. It reminded me a bit of my conversations with Paul Kingsnorth when Mark Connolly had Paul Kingsnorth and I together at his place in Northern Ireland. And Michael does a wonderful job of seeing God shining through his creation, God shining through the splendor, and seeing that through English literature, through poetry. And he had a number of great comments. He noticed that he was pondering Nietzsche again, and thought in many ways how Nietzsche was someone who was a Christian who felt betrayed by Christianity, or at least the church and Christianity's form available to Nietzsche. And that accounts for some of his anger and his lashing out. And that's obviously not an uncommon thing. And actually we talked about that, as there were presentations and then question and answer, and then a little bit freer opportunity for conversation. And I reflected on the fact that I think is a big piece of this little corner and what's been going on in this space. While some of us are in the church, and comfortably so. I certainly include myself. I love the church. I love my church, and all of my life I have found my experience in church, certainly not perfect, but a sincere blessing. There are many others who struggle with church, and not only during the sessions, but even after, with conversations. These are often conversations I have with people, that people will come up to me and share with me that, loud and clear about the church and the message, but they've been looking at churches, and they've tried churches, and they've struggled with churches, and they've been disappointed. I certainly can't say that I've never been disappointed by church. I'm disappointed by church because I'm disappointed by human beings. And churches are made up of people. And Esther left a really interesting comment on one of the videos. Esther O'Reilly, I keep calling her Esther. Bethel McGrew talked about her parents recently changed churches and have been attending a Reformed church. And there are certain elements of the Reformed confessions that they can't fully subscribe to. And so that sort of keeps them a little bit at arm's length from the church, but there are other elements of the church that obviously appeal to them, which is why that they've been attending it. And whether it's sort of a doctrinal difficulty or whether it's a difficulty of practice or let's say behavioral expectations for a church, I mean, these things continue to bother people and require working out. And it isn't always the case that people can come to amicable, negotiated solutions. Usually, though, in churches, you might not be able to become a member for one reason or another, but you can probably attend and participate quite fully. So this is an ongoing thing, and what I really enjoyed about Michael's presentation, at least for me, part of what I got out of it was understanding, really seeing the need of the time as materialism continues to recede. People are hungry for meaning, they are hungry for God, and they are looking for God. And it isn't a surprise that, as the psalmist says, they see his witness in nature, and so they seek God through nature. I look back to my own Christian formation. Seeking God through nature, though, always only gets one so far, because nature is, of course, glorious and beautiful, but also red in tooth and claw. C.S. Lewis wrestles with this often. Wrestles with, what can we learn through nature? And part of, I think, a corollary to so much of what we've talked about in this little corner, as psychologists and cognitive scientists have opened our eyes to, really in many ways, our smallness as human beings, the limitations of our cognition. I'm going to do a video at some point about confessionality, because I want to make some points about the need for the church to leave space for room and process as we both work through what we learn from God by general revelation, through his creation, through reason, through the avenues of the knowledge of God that are available to all. Now, some of you might hear that and sort of bristle, but read Romans 1. It's very clear in Romans 1. It's very clear. The heavens declare the glory of God. Day after day they pour forth speech. So the Bible is very clear that God has made himself available to us through nature, but that our view of God through nature, as with our view of anything because of our limitations and our limits, has limitations. And for this reason, obviously, according to Christian theology, God also makes himself known through special revelation. In the Old Testament, God made himself known through the prophets. Obviously, in Christianity, we see that God made himself definitively known through his Son, Jesus Christ. So these are, this is kind of basic Christian theology, and working through this question of, okay, what can we see? How can we see God through nature? We're clearly seeing difficulty of many people in knowing God through the Bible, knowing God through the church. And so many people are turning to nature, and that sort of starts the conversation, but one wants to go further. Imagine, if you will, having a relationship with a human being. You can see their form, perhaps you can see their beauty, perhaps you can learn many things about them by observing their behavior. But suppose the person is mute, or perhaps you're deaf, and perhaps you have no sign language available to you. if I had to only know my wife through her actions, through her behavior, through how she looks, that would be a very thin relationship compared to the ways that I can know my wife through her speech, through her sharing her mind, through her sharing her heart through words. And you could write books and talk hours about the dynamics between this, but perhaps that's a good analogy in terms of knowing God through nature and hearing God speak. Now, I completely understand that, especially post-Enlightenment, there's an enormous amount of skepticism with respect to that. And even before the Enlightenment, there was a tremendous amount of diversity with respect to what has God said, and how can we know this? And even today, there's a beautiful red bird right up there. I'm not too far from the gardens of this beautiful Roman Catholic monastery. Just a gorgeous place that we're meeting. Beautiful grounds, really tremendous. But again, you can see that bird, and you can read Romans 1. Romans 1 talks about it. We can see God's power, we can see God's beauty, we can see God's glory, we can see that all of that through his creation. But creation also gives us mixed signals. Now, one might argue that even two people in a 35-year marriage, like myself and my wife, we have many moments of mixed signals, many moments of miscommunication, many moments of misunderstood speech. But, what we do in a marriage is we continue to work on it, and we continue to work through it. So Michael's presentation yesterday, I very much enjoyed, thinking about knowing God through revelation, knowing God through the ponderings of poets. He had a great line. He was talking about phenomenology, and if you ask, another thing that Michael is really strong at is he helps us sort of push back on the implicit scientism that really holds us captive as a culture. If you ask what color is, anybody who's had even a junior school education will say color is the refraction of light. Is that what color is? And he mentioned Goethe. Goethe is an interesting character. For when you meet with someone like Spencer Clavin and Michael Martin, you begin to realize just how unread you are. I haven't read much Goethe. I don't know that much about Goethe. Will Durant's anthologies is this massive work that Will Durant did. Within that massive work, you can often find, and sometimes you can find them on YouTube, some of the clippings of people like Goethe and Will Durant. Even though his work is dated, of course, you can get sort of a wonderful sort of little snapshot of someone like Goethe and what Goethe was about, and his discovery of color and sound. And I think a lot of the rise of phenomenology that we've seen in the 20th century has been a resistance to and a pushing back from this materialist deconstruction of the world in which glory is lost. The glory of that beautiful red bird that was just in that tree is lost in many ways on the dissection table. Yes, you could dissect that bird and find glory within in terms of the amazing complexity of even just a small bird. Let's say even just the sparrows that are sort of popping in and out of the bushes here. There's I don't think that's not a sparrow, but even just that little bird just hopping around, it's a glorious little creature. Yes, you can marvel in dissection at the digestive tract and at the anatomy of that small bird, but the bird just hopping along the shrubs here, very common bird, very common space, doing a very common thing on a beautiful summer morning. There's so much glory in that bird, and that glory is available, and you just need eyes to see and ears to hear, and often patience and stillness and silence to appreciate the bird. Spencer Clavin, let's see. Oh, another one of the quotes I lifted from Michael was, looking for a disclosure of a phenomenological Christianity. Is the disclosure of a phenomenological Christianity possible? Thinking back to Bethel's comment about her parents and their struggles in finding a church home. Even just think about that. I mean, Bethel's parents are two well-known, accomplished Christian scholars, a philosopher, and a woman who's, writes penetrating books about biblical theology, and they struggle to find a church home. I had a question yesterday about the autodidact struggle, and it's a struggle both for churches and for people. Churches, by necessity, have to be in some ways sort of generic communities, because most of the people are not autodidacts. Most of the people cannot write complex analyses on the gospel and history and the Gospel of John. Most people are not philosophers and chess grandmasters, and yet they have all of their own complexity. And in a church, people need to come together and find a way and a space for them to begin to not just have the mute glory shown through creation, but also they have to talk, and they will, especially in this day, they will read the scriptures, and they will have read philosophy and literature, and they will have their own experiences, and they have to somehow all come onto the same page sufficiently for the church to really do its thing. That's not an easy thing at all. And so, again, part of what I appreciated about Michael's presentation, really, I think at the heart of it was the quest for a phenomenological Christianity. A Christianity that not only has you need the speech and the doctrinal content. You're not going to have a church without that. But yet that also the phenomenological. And I think that's part of the reason for the renaissance of the more sacramental traditions, such as the Roman Catholic tradition and the Orthodox tradition. We're here in Washington, D.C., we're sort of at this is sort of American Roman Catholicism central here. There's Catholic University, which is a large university. There's the shrine to John Paul II, which is his library, and there's this enormous visage of John Paul II there. There's this enormous basilica to the Immaculate Conception not very far from me. There's this monastery, and the whole area is just full of monasteries and various buildings that are devoted to the work of the Catholic Church. And of course, as someone from an iconoclastic Protestant tradition, there's always a degree of dissonance with me with the statuary, and I don't, I obviously don't smash anything, and I don't feel the need to smash anything, but there remains in me dissonance with the statuary. And I'm sort of at a place now where, I can see the rationality for the beauty and the instantiation. I was having a wonderful, so Father Eric Big Mac is here with us again today because he's working on a 4-year degree in canon law, and of course, so he's doing it remotely during the year while he has his other duties in Fargo, North Dakota, and he's summering here in Washington, D.C., which I really feel for him. He's suffering for the Lord because summer is probably the best time to be in Fargo, North Dakota, and is probably the worst time to be in Washington, D.C., because summers here are hot and humid with evening thunderstorms. But, so I love talking to Father Eric because I can quiz him, and he's a gracious answerer of my questions as I try to understand more and more about the Roman Catholic Church and its practices. And he's just such a lovely. The church is blessed to have him, and he's so young, and he's already wise, and his heart is beautiful. And I hope years of being a priest and the challenges that brings him, it will mature him. It will, as the words of Ken Miedema, it may give him a sadder, wiser heart, as age and maturity often does. But I hope it doesn't diminish his joy and the beauty that does shine through him. He's just a lovely, lovely guy. I had a chance to spend time with him after the Chino conference. We had a lovely dinner together, and we went to a bar after the conference yesterday with Mark Lefevre and some of the other people that were here at the conference, and so I had a lovely time with them. And then this video is so terrible; it just rambles so much train of thought. I have to get back to Spencer and the rest of the day. But then after that, I went, and Nate Heil had an Airbnb because he wanted a full kitchen, and so we had dinner with myself and Nate and Michael and a couple other guys. I won't name them because I don't want to name people on videos that, who knows whether or not they want to be named or not, but you know who you are. And so then Nate cooked for us, which was lovely. Nate, of course, has been a chef and is a wonderful cook. And then we just had a marvelous dinner together, and then Michael gave me a ride back. So yeah, Michael's presentation, really enjoyed. And then we had some time of Q&A. And Spencer gave his presentation, and Spencer gave a conversation about the classics and some of the quotes. It had a great quote. "We live in a culture that treats ideals as if they are insults." Boy, when he said that, I thought that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And in all the work that we're doing in the Christian Reformed Church and our confessional conversations and the struggles that we're having, I thought that's exactly right. We live in a culture that treats ideals as if they are insults. And that we seem to hold the highest at the highest value, say, critical thinking. And now certainly critical thinking has its place, and anybody who watches my channel knows that I practice critical thinking when I make videos and when I analyze and all of that. I practice critical thinking, but there's a time and a place for critical thinking, and there's a time and a place for seeing the glory. One of the things that Spencer, let me see if one of the things that Spencer then did with us was, I had heard of the poem "Ode to a Grecian Urn." I had never read it. I had never really focused on poetry much in my life. Hebrew poetry in terms of sermon work and all, but so he does a lot of poetry memorization of classic poetry, and that came out in the little warm-up that we had done. And so then we had a half hour, and we took "Ode to a Grecian Urn," and our job was to see if we could sort of memorize the first little bit of it. It's not a very long poem. There's some beautiful gardens here, so we walked in the gardens as we, worked to memorize it. I'd done a fair amount of, scriptural memorization growing up and going to Christian school. I had always done memorization because I was involved in theater in high school, so you memorize your lines. And I found actually the way too much distraction, and really the key to memorization often for me was to speak things aloud, because I'm such an auditory learner that when I hear things, I can remember them much better than sort of with my dyslexic. With my dyslexia, just reading them. But so then I had to work in silence because there were a number of people around, and some people were talking, and I was often distracted by the ear. But because my ear tends to have priority over my eye. But then the more and more I gave myself to the poem, it really sort of Lectio Divina I was practicing as I was working through it. I sort of abandoned the translation project and embraced the Lectio project of the poem, and just really let the poem move me, and got into the poem and could see its glory and its beauty. And again, that to me was part of the same theme from yesterday, something that is so necessary right now with so much skepticism due to pluralism and the complexity of so many voices being out there, that I think for many people, probably the spark of ignition will come through. The spark of ignition will come through There was another quote that I grabbed yesterday. It was from Michael from Faust. The eternal famine that leads us ever onward. Yeah. That. I think about C.S. Lewis's problem of pain. And C.S. Lewis saying that pain is a megaphone to a deaf world. And I know, I remember listening to a personal friend of C.S. Lewis that had made a recording, and I was listening to the recording, and just wrestling with, okay, Lewis, veteran of World War I, for as amazing as Lewis was, and Spencer spoke about Lewis too, talking about how Lewis had all of this, had Aristotle, and Aquinas just submerged beneath books like Miracles and The Problem of Pain. And I thought, yeah, that was just a tremendous image of understanding the work of Lewis. Lewis sometimes could also say things like, pain is a megaphone for a deaf world. On one hand, I listen to that and think, yeah, that's brilliant, and that's exactly right. On the other hand, I don't know if he would have written that after he had written A Grief Observed. Lewis, for all of his self-disclosure, many people have noted, was a man who could be remarkably hard to know. On one hand, a man who shared so much and could write with so much clarity. Also was a man who, if you read some of the biographies with respect to the details of his relationship with Joy Davidman, yeah, there's a lot there that his priest was severely disappointed by. So people are slowly coming into the parking lot to go to Mass. So yeah, really enjoyed Spencer's presentation, and very much enjoyed the poetry walk that we did out here in the grounds. And then Joe gave a presentation, which I thought was lovely too. Talked about mental health. Really have a lot of thoughts about that. Talked about silence. The silence is different when he's working with people in person rather than online. Nate gave me this book as a birthday present because my birthday was just this past Monday, and 11 Hidden Gems in the Works of the Inklings. This is a Russian translator who's translating the work of the Inklings into Russian, and of course translators are very close readers of the text, and these were 11 insights that he derived from translating the work of the Inklings. And so maybe when I'm done with this video, I will start digging into this book, because I'm really looking forward to it. I'll read on the plane. The print's nice and big, so those of you in the membership section know that I did my review of the Kindle Scribe, which I used during the event. And I might have follow-up. I might have I've always wanted to do some hardware reviews, because I like hardware. I should talk about this camera that I'm using, and the little stand that I'm using, and the lens that I'm using, and all of these kind of things. I enjoy working on these kinds of things, so maybe I'll give an update on this Kindle Scribe, because you don't really know a device like this until after you've used it for a while. So maybe I'll give a little 6-month review or something like that. Maybe I'm sure some of these things will come up in my videos, whether I treat the book directly or whether they the best way to repel Dementors according to Gandalf the Grey. Why The Lord of the Rings was such phenomenal success despite J.R.R. Tolkien's unprofessional writing. Well, there's lots of stuff in this book. Tom Bombadil, Tolkien's hidden message for despairing humanity. I'm super excited. This is going to go fast. The secret literary theory behind J.R.R. Tolkien's books that breaks all the rules of writing. Oh gosh, just the titles. How Eru Ilúvatar dealt with discord of Melkor. Oh, that's a great part from the Silmarillion. Or why we need to embrace our feelings to be transformed. Oh yeah, there's a lot of the Great War between Barfield and Lewis in that. Letting things be. Why hobbits love all things that grow. The Grand Inquisitor, how Tolkien answered Dostoevsky's most agonizing question. I just can't wait to read it now. These are so good. Thank you, Nate. True knowledge comes from inner silence. That was very much in keeping with a lot of yesterday's presentation. The Silver Trumpet, Owen Barfield's fairy tale as a metaphor for tectonic shift of consciousness. Yeah, the Silver Trumpet. I haven't read the Silver Trumpet. Another one. How Owen Barfield saved the appearance of Princess Violetta in the Silver Trumpet. So I guess I'll have to read the Silver Trumpet as well. So, yep. 11 Hidden Gems in the work of the Inklings. So I'm sure that will get read before I get all the way back to Sacramento. Yep, I think that's good enough for a report. Time is moving on. I should probably attend to some other things, but I had a little bit of time, and I thought, well, I lugged this camera equipment with me. I might as well use it, and the sound should be tolerable. Well, I guess I'll have to see if the sound is terrible. Then I've just spent an hour talking to myself, and then I'll just put it behind the member section. But this one will probably go onto the full channel. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment.